The tree was stolen. An 8-foot flowering cherry tree gone without a trace from where it was planted on the Capitol lawn last Friday, just 50 feet or so from the governor's office. The tree was placed in the ground before the weekend by Capitol maintenance men who say they just sort of set it in a hole in the ground so it could be ceremoniously planted today. 4 chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution and 1 chapter of the Sons of the Revolution were to conduct the ceremony at 3 o'clock. But when they walked out to where the tree should have been, they found only an empty hole. But they were not dissuaded. They called a maintenance man to bring shovels and dig up some dirt from around another cherry tree not far from the empty hole. And then they manned their shovels, and with some words of praise for Washington and several snickers for the unknown culprit, they replanted a tree that's been there for 3 years. Sponsors for the event say a substitute for the stolen tree will be planted as soon as possible. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The newfound dollars come from the state retirement systems. In a letter dated Friday, Retirement Systems Director David Bronner said the contribution rate for the state can be reduced by almost $7 million in the Education Fund and almost $12 million in the General Fund. The reduction stems from the system's investment performance. While on his statewide campaign for passage of his oil windfall investment plan, the governor said these aren't enough dollars to support education force efforts to fund a 16% teacher raise and 14% employee raise. Ways and Means Committee Chairman Walter Owen says he's ready to support a measure that would use this new money to fund an increase in benefits for retired teachers and state employees. And Owen says he expects a break in the pay raise issue in the form of a compromise bill providing teachers 14% more pay with an extra 2% conditioned on the availability of money. How legislators react to the 2 new turns could be affected by a letter from House Speaker Joe McCorkadale urging them not to get caught up in a power play that could lead to a prorated budget, and a threat from Governor James that he'll veto any pay increase more than 14%. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Happened today on what you did today?
Well, today we filed another contempt petition against the Montgomery County Commission.
Better come on in. Stand below it. Yeah.
Oh, but now you're talking.
Get your back, fellas. Keep your back. Travis, go get them on TV.
With direct advantages not only for the company, but for our customers and the state as a whole. Alabama Power has agreed to sell electricity from a portion of one of its coal-fired generating plants to 2 outside utilities.
Will be provided out of the James H. Miller Steam Plant, which is located in northwest Jefferson County.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
I say, please refer to your letter of FORC assessment. Routinely do. What did we do? And
if on a holiday schedule.
When forced reduction, addition of vacation assignments prior to holidays. Consequently, our full report is delayed. At $215.57 penalty and a $17 discount.
Let me state what my feelings on that. When it falls on a holiday,
Yeah, that
we didn't
does
have any
that.
provision
Yeah, that
to
does
give them time to make that up. However, if it's just late, then I might have.
Lawyers who lobby and electioneers to gain support of local state politicians, as well as representing minority interests. Each group, unequal in power and status, tried into its value system and excluding
Involved in any political process. Linkage is.
Thirdly, it sustains a conservative, status quo-oriented system by making it highly resilient to change, either by the electors or by the non-legitimatized interest groups themselves. In closing my talk,
Baxley says big business has been paying for the advertisements that encourage the voters to vote for Amendment Number 4. The amendment would prohibit an injured employee from suing fellow workers, the company and its management, and safety inspectors, even if the injury were the result of negligence. Baxley says the slick media campaign is misleading. He says those who support the amendment hope to take away the injured employee's right to a jury trial. Beasley says if Amendment 4 passes, job safety standards will be lowered.
The reason I believe the safety standards would be lowered was simply this. First, on the federal level, you notice they're backing off of this sort of thing because of trying to economize. And if you don't have the incentive from a dollar and cent standpoint to have a safe place for your employees to work, and you don't have any way that they can do anything about it if you don't provide it, then it just makes sense that they're going to look at the dollar marks and they're going to say more profits if we can cut out this and cut out that.
Beasley says the ads are filled with half-truths that are being pushed by those with a vested interest. He says it's untrue that the state is losing industry because of any law on the books, and he says the state's workmen's compensation law is not adequate for job-related injuries. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA, TV News.
In the Klan, and we don't feel it's productive. It's happening all over America, and that's exactly what's happened. We've had the Now, my opinion, and the opinion of the Klan, is that the white race should not involve itself in non-white areas, Africa, or Asia, or anywhere else. But my opinion is that our people should stay to themselves. We shouldn't intervene in the affairs of other countries, of non-white countries. And the equality of man was in the early part of the 80s, and we feel that we represent the only ultimate solution to some of the problems America is facing.
The FBI is investigating charges that guards here at the federal minimum security prison have stolen thousands of dollars worth of federal property. That property includes ice machines, shrubberies, camera, and other items.
Another charge now under federal investigation is that prison craftsmen built a fireplace mantel and a sprinkler system, both of them allegedly built with the prison materials and for the use of prison guards here.
Several inmates told me they had marked the mantel and sprinkler system. They said they placed the mark there to help authorities prove that prison labor and materials were used for the personal benefit of prison camp personnel. Investigators are also checking into charges that a riding lawnmower was declared surplus and is now in use by one member of the camp staff on his farm in a nearby county.
TV 12 News has copies of purchase order numbers which were given to us by inmates here at the Maxwell Prison Camp. The prisoners say they are orders for materials and equipment that cannot be found at the camp. Federal investigators are also checking into those allegations.
I was told by inmates that one of the purchase order numbers is 157-0081. It is dated November 13, 1981. It's for 7 women's raincoats. Inmates say that in November of 1981, there were only 2 women serving time here. Inmates I talked to out here say they became suspicious that some officials were stealing and decided to organize their own surveillance operation. Beginning about a year ago, they say they watched officials, kept records of what they felt was suspicious activity, and recorded what they thought were questionable purchase orders. Another charge being checked out by the Justice Department involved the alleged theft on November 2, 1981, of building materials. My sources are accusing an official here of loading building materials on his private vehicle, not signing for them, and taking them to his private residence. My inmate sources say other building materials have been taken from the camp to the homes of some federal prison camp officials. Camp officials say they are not aware of any investigation into charges being made by inmates and former inmates.
TV 12 News has learned that the FBI is in the process of interviewing former inmates here at the Maxwell Prison Camp. They are being asked questions about the allegations made by inmates who say that prison guards and other personnel may be involved in major thefts from the federal prison camp. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Maxwell Prison Camp.
The new policy is an outgrowth of a prison probe into an inmate's allegations that he was beaten at Draper Correctional Center. The investigation resulted in the firing of Draper Warden Joe Oliver, Assistant Warden James Digman, Guard Captain G.O. Davis, and Dog Warden Winston Grant. Oliver and Digman on several occasions reportedly refused to take lie detector tests during the department's probe of inmate Jefferson Lowe's charges that he was beaten in Digman's office last September. The 4 former prison officials are appealing their dismissals. Prison spokesman Ron Tate says the new policy on polygraph examinations only spells out what was a gray area in Corrections Department policy.
Well, what we had before was really a gray area. It was just implied more than anything else, and I think the Draper incident just brought that to the fore, where we need something in writing. So last week, Commissioner Hopper indeed did it.
State Senator Rio Kirkland, who is representing the 4 fired prison employees, says the new regulation is unconstitutional. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
Early part of the 80s.
Black started off the program with a brief statement of the ideas and policies of the Klan, which Black calls a fraternal organization for the protection and advancement of the white race. Black criticized the federal government for what he calls massive discrimination against whites through social programs for minorities. Then the switchboard was opened.
Good morning, you're on the air.
The calls range from politely curious to belligerent, with some callers clearly opposing Black and the Klan, while a few others seemed at least mildly supportive, if not of the Klan, at least of Black's right to explain his group and their beliefs. Many of those beliefs clashed sharply with the federal government. Black says programs by the government to integrate society have failed. He says the government needs to get out of the business of legislating equality because it is impossible and undesirable. And he called for less U.S. interference in non-white ruled countries.
Now, my opinion, and the opinion of the Klan, is that the white race should not involve itself in non-white areas, Africa or Asia or anywhere else. But wherever it's
Last week, Black's group threatened to stage a counter-demonstration against voting rights marchers at the Capitol, but they did not. However, Black did say today the Voting Rights Act is just another form of discrimination against whites. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The advertisements against the amendment are being paid by an organization called the Citizens Coalition for Constitutional Rights. Most of the financial contributors are individuals and attorneys. Organization Chairman Roger Lee says no corporations are included. Alabamians for Amendment Number 4 are paying for the commercials and ads that ask voters to vote for the amendment, but the members refuse to make their financial backers public. Both organizations aren't required to do so until 30 days after the election. There's quite a bit of speculation that big business is behind the amendment. The state's Chamber of Commerce and Governor Fob James are supporting it. Holman Head with the State Chamber of Commerce says unless the co-employee bill is taken off the books, jobs will be lost and industries would refuse to come to Alabama. When I asked Head to name some industries that refuse to come to the state for this reason, he said he couldn't, but referred me to Reuben Finney with the Alabama Development Office. Finney says the bill is a definite factor that prohibits companies from locating here, even though it's not the main reason. But Finney could not give me any names of companies that refuse to come to Alabama because of the bill. He says most companies interested in Alabama don't even know about the law, since neighboring states don't have a co-employee statute. Because of information like this, two former political opponents and now practicing attorneys, Bill Baxley and Jerry Beasley, spoke out against the amendment. Both believe that if it passes, an injured employee's constitutional right to a jury trial will be taken away. And as Baxley put it, Amendment number 4 is a serious, major issue. He says he hopes the public realizes what they're voting for. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
There have been some election campaigns.
Currently, there are 11 trustees at the University of Alabama, a chancellor, 6 trustees emeriti, and the governor, who acts as the ex officio president of the board. Amendment number 7 calls for the board to consist of 2 members from each congressional district in the state, an additional member from Tuscaloosa County, the superintendent of education, and the governor, who would continue in his role as president. The bill says those members who are on the board now would continue to hold office until their terms expire and until new members can be elected and confirmed. The additional members would be elected by existing board members and confirmed by the state Senate with initial terms of not more than 6 years. The amendment says no trustee shall receive any pay other than his actual expenses incurred while discharging his duties as a trustee. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Last August, the legislature passed 2 budget isolation measures, one in the form of a constitutional amendment that, if ratified this September, will affect future legislatures, and another in the form of a law affecting this legislature. Today, the Supreme Court struck down the law. The decision was based on the fact that the bill proposing the law originally started out as a constitutional amendment. The court held that if a bill starts out offering a constitutional amendment and along the way is changed to offer a law, the purpose has been changed and the outcome voided. Thus, the budget isolation law is null and void. Governor James, obviously disappointed in the technical error, wanted to make one point absolutely clear.
This court's ruling had nothing whatsoever to do with the constitutional amendment on isolation.
And the governor says isolation could be resurrected during this regular session if each house adopted a resolution to that effect. But no resolution showed up in either house today. The Senate worked under its old rules without isolation on a number of sunset bills continuing state agencies. But the House is locked in a filibuster over a pay raise issue. The filibuster started when the House leadership tried to put the education budget in front of the teacher pay raise issue. The education forces were certain they could lock the 16% teacher pay raise in before considering the budget, which the House leaders say it can't afford. But the education forces have run short by several votes each time they've tried to put the pay raise issue back in front. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
We're making exactly what we made about 1975.
In 75?
Yes, about, and you remember the last legislature in March.
Yours
and this year to be the same thing.
I didn't know that. Now, this bill was raised to what?
35.
Mr. Holmes, you had something. Okay. Next is House Bill 546.
I was going to contest all of these local bills because of the bombastic attitude of some of not the supervisors. I think it's so stupid on their part, and it shows such a degree.
Mr. Langford moves the House Bill 546 be given a favorable report.
The case began when Representative Bob Gafford of Birmingham filed suit in Montgomery County Circuit Court. Gafford was essentially asking the court if the law had been properly passed. The Circuit Court originally said yes, but now the Supreme Court has overruled and said no. The question revolves around how the bill became law. The Supreme Court says the legislative process was violated. The court said that happened when the legislature swapped a statutory bill for a constitutional bill. The court said that changed the original purpose of the bill, something that the Constitution prohibits. The court has ruled that because the purpose was changed as the bill moved through the legislature, the final bill was null and void. The important factor to consider is that the High Court did not rule on the merits of budget isolation, but instead on the process by which that bill became law. The immediate impact is that there is no longer any budget isolation controlling the House and the Senate during this regular session. There is, however, no apparent impact on the constitutional amendment that would lock in budget isolation in the future. That constitutional amendment will still face the voters later this fall. The reaction of the House and the Senate to this ruling will be measured later in the day when they convene this afternoon. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The fire could be seen from nearly 2 miles away. When Montgomery County Sheriff's Department deputies arrived on the scene, the house was engulfed in flames, and the roof was falling in. Volunteer firemen could do little more than keep the blaze from spreading to neighboring houses. One neighbor, Art Baker, says he heard a loud explosion, and the flames lit up the sky like daylight. Baker and other neighbors broke out windows in the house and were able to pull 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, to safety. The children sustained minor injuries, and a handful of civilians were injured while pulling the children from the burning building. The fire remains under investigation by the State Fire Marshal's Office. In Wa, Alabama, Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The present vendor is Prison Management Systems out of Birmingham, and they submitted, I think, about a $27.3 million contract. So this will go into effect in November, and it's going to be basically about the same thing as Prison Management Systems had, and it will comply with all the rules and regulations of the federal orders.
The advertisements against the amendment are being paid by an organization called the Citizens Coalition for Constitutional Rights. Most of the financial contributors are individuals and attorneys. Organization Chairman Roger Lee says no corporations are included. Alabamians for Amendment Number 4 are paying for the commercials and ads that ask voters to vote for the amendment, but the members refuse to make their financial backers public. Both organizations aren't required to do so until 30 days after the election. There's quite a bit of speculation that big business is behind the amendment. The state's Chamber of Commerce and Governor Fob James are supporting it. Holman Head with the State Chamber of Commerce says unless the co-employee bill is taken off the books, jobs will be lost and industries would refuse to come to Alabama. When I asked Head to name some industries that refuse to come to the state for this reason, he said he couldn't, but referred me to Reuben Finney with the Alabama Development Office. Finney says the bill is a definite factor that prohibits companies from locating here, even though it's not the main reason. But Finney could not give me any names of companies that refuse to come to Alabama because of the bill. He says most companies interested in Alabama don't even know about the law, since neighboring states don't have a co-employee statute. Because of information like this, two former political opponents and now practicing attorneys, Bill Baxley and Jerry Beasley, spoke out against the amendment. Both believe that if it passes, an injured employee's constitutional right to a jury trial will be taken away. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA, TV News.
There have been some election campaigns.
Talking about it, the guy came out and fired him. Job.
Infant deaths, what causes them, what can be done to prevent them, and why some doctors think they're on the increase in Alabama. A four-part series starting Thursday in the 6 o'clock report. Infant deaths, what causes them, what can be done to prevent them, and why some doctors think that they're increasing in Alabama. A four-part series starting tonight in the 6 o'clock report. Infant deaths, what causes them, what can be done to prevent them, and why some doctors think they're increasing in Alabama. A four-part series continues in tonight's 6 o'clock report.
The filibuster started almost 7 hours ago when the House leadership tried to put the pay raise issue off and consider the education budget instead. The education forces have been unsuccessfully trying to stop that ever since. According to sources within the House leadership, it would be harder for the education forces to change the budget to fund the 16% pay raise. Those education forces have, for the last 3 weeks, been hoping they could lock in the pay raise bill first, then leave it up to the House leadership to find the money when the budget is considered. But the education force numbers have dwindled since 3 weeks ago when they were in the majority. On a number of occasions tonight, the education forces fell about 5 or so votes behind, losing their efforts to bring the pay raise issue up first. The state Supreme Court's ruling striking down budget isolation law because of a technical error in how the legislature adopted the measure hasn't drawn too much comment today, except from Governor James.
This court's ruling had nothing whatsoever to do with the constitutional amendment on isolation. And in my humble opinion, isolation has worked exactly as it was supposed to work. You know yourselves, the budgets have been isolated, and when the budgets are passed, it will give you a much better opportunity to isolate other key issues. And I would hope that the House and Senate will simply pass a joint resolution to continue operating under the isolation procedure as they have operated on the first 12 days of this session.
No resolution was offered in either the House or Senate today, but the governor says he's received commitments from some House and Senate members that it will be. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
somebody comes up at 12:30 and they want to see culprits and the first one's up, that's the first one they pull out.
Oh. Keep your back to us. Keep your back to us. No, that's done about 4 times a day. Well, they're not supposed to be on TV because somebody's sitting up here. Let me see if it's clean, how clean it is.
That was, this is boards and stuff for the pension. Okay.
Okay, in a minute.
Playing with the camera again, aren't you? He knows nothing about machinery.
could affect not only the balance of power, but let me say that today, when the Arabs have, they outnumber us in artillery pieces probably 1 to 5, and in tanks 1 to 7, and soon it will be 1 to 10. You must realize that we, until 2 years ago, until a year ago, thought that if we can have one piece of equipment against 3 Arab pieces, that is tanks 1 to 3, aircraft ratio 1 to 3, we are still well off. That's fine.
state's Democratic Party is aware that November is 9 months away. The party also remembers the solid Republican whipping last November, and party sources say they're still concerned about their party and its winning tradition. But today, loyal party members are more optimistic about its future, although some party members say they've still got a long way to go. One reason for the new optimism is funding. Sources say campaign contributions, which at first were trickling in, are now flowing in steadily. A second reason is that more people are joining the party, and a third reason is the future of Reaganomics. Some politicians say the president's new program will have a tough time in Congress, but Wallace says he hopes they'll work. But if Reaganomics fails, Wallace says the Democrats must be ready.
And not that government can turn everything around, but I think it behooves all of us to think as being Americans first and partisans second, because I am not like some that I have heard that hoped Carter would fail because it would help the Republican chances.
Wallace says if the plan doesn't work, there will be, quote, revolutionary politics left and right. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The governor read the letter to a group of engineers meeting in Montgomery. It said the proposed constitutional amendment isn't perfect, but it meets most of labor's objectives. And the law firm says the unions are supporting it. The governor also asked the engineers to vote yes on the first 3 amendments, which allow him to implement his plan for investing the state's $450 million in oil lease money. He said not only will his plan leave the state with $720 million in new schools, roads, bridges, mental hospitals, and prisons, but it will mean thousands of real jobs for Alabamians, especially those who work in construction-related jobs. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News.
Oh, boy. Oh, I'll have to tell Jenny that one. That we are going to see some revolutionary politics left and right in this country, and I do not desire to see that happen, but I desire to see the membership. Everything should be done for the purpose of seeing that the middle class continues to exist, because it is a middle and low income part of that class and even upper middle class that have paid the taxes, fought the wars, produced the goods, and they are the ones that have given us stability and order.
And even Sadat did not make could affect not only the outnumber us in artillery pieces probably 1 to 5, and in tanks 1 to 7, and soon it will be 1 to 10. You must realize that we, until 2 years ago, until a year ago, thought that if we can have one piece of equipment against 3 other pieces, that is tanks 1 to 3, aircraft ratio 1 to 3, we are still well off. That's fine.
While Amendments 8 and 9 concern different groups, the language in the bills is basically the same, and the effect would also be about the same. The amendments would make it possible for producers and farmers to contribute so much per head or pound to a checkoff fund that would be used for promotion, distribution, marketing, and so on. Farmers and producers already do this, but current law requires a statewide amendment every few years to allow them to continue. If the amendment passes, statewide elections will no longer be required. It would put management of the fund in the hands of the legislature and producers and farmers. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The main part and thrust of Civil Air Patrol that really catches my eye, because knowing the shortage that we're going to have between now and the 1990s of the 18-year-olds, and this shortage is going to be worldwide, I think it's of deep concern to all of us who serve in the Secretariat. I think it's a concern to all the uniforms in the United States that we somehow can attract these young people by telling them really what the services have to offer. And maybe also get them to understand that patriotism really isn't a dirty word.
More than 100 people filled the House chamber, almost equally divided on the abortion bills offered by Representative Euclid Raines. One of Raines' bill would require unwed mothers 18 years or younger to have parental consent for an abortion. The other bill would prohibit the use of public funds for advertising or counseling services that encourage abortions, except where a mother's life is in danger. The pro-lifers asked the committee to pass the bill, although most of their testimony encouraged outlawing abortion altogether under the premise that abortions amount to murder. The pro-choice advocates opposed the bill on the grounds that the restrictions were out of line. One example suggested that if a minor as young as 12 could be treated for venereal disease without parental consent, then why should an 18-year-old unwed mother need to ask her parents about having an abortion? One analysis of the bill prohibiting public funds for ads or counseling services suggested the bill could jeopardize the state's participation in the federal Medicaid program. Also today, the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee passed out a general fund budget in lightning-fast action. Committee Chairman Richmond Pearson offered several general fund budget changes that cut the appropriations to the Departments of Health, Mental Health, and Corrections by a total of $19 million, making room for the addition of more than $17 million worth of programs that were cut out of the education budget several weeks ago. The transfer of those programs leaves the Senate's version of the education budget with room to handle the 16% teacher pay raise. This is the opposite direction of that being taken by the House so far, which indicates that the issue will be settled in conference committee. But some observers say without budget isolation provisions, it likely will be possible that any conference committee won't surface until late in the session. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
If you watch network television in the mornings, then you should certainly know this face. It's Willard Scott, one of the friendliest and most colorful personalities in television. It's Willard's job to give you the weather report during the Today Show. But in addition, Willard mixes in a few comical quips and quotes, which usually bring a few laughs. Yesterday, Willard was in Mobile for Mardi Gras.
I didn't know they had a Mardi Gras in Mobile. I'd never heard of the Mardi Gras in Mobile, but I think that the country knows about it now.
Does it compare with the New Orleans Mardi Gras?
I think the marked difference to me is that the New Orleans one is much bigger. And this one in Mobile was a lot more hometownish. I think there was more, local flavor to it. The one thing I learned, I always like to learn one thing when I leave town. The one thing I learned, this guy, Joe Kane, in 1866, who supposedly started the current, more popularized version of running through the streets and blowing horns and bands and things like that. The expression raising Cain, did you know that? I never heard that.
Wasn't aware of that.
The old expression when you say somebody's raising Cain supposedly is attributed to him. That the fact that he started Mardi Gras where they do all the things that they do.
And they raise Cain.
And do they raise Cain?
Willard, whose home is in Virginia, joined the Today Show 2 years ago this week. And a lot of people say he's more popular than Today Show veterans Jane Pauley and Gene Shalit. Tonight at 10, Willard will talk about the NBC project he's working on at Tuskegee Institute. From Tuskegee, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Got a briefing or anything?
Janet will have a briefing. She's back there? I'm stuck behind the camera.
To receiving the award. Last year, our winner was Mrs. Clara Potts. Really happy that all of y'all have consented to help us find a winner this year. Which was founded in 1973 by Samuel Beard, who was then an associate. From there, the American Institute for Public Service was incepted. Senator Robert Taft, and it's a bronze medallion donated by the Franklin Mint to the American Institute. Soliciting nominations that way. There again, explaining what the American Institute, the long-lasting benefits of the service would be endured over a period of time.
But so you have to be a team.
It's in for Athens State. Basket by
Willard Scott is not an ordinary weatherman, neither are his weather broadcasts, which are seen each weekday morning on NBC's Today Show program. That's one of the main reasons he's become so popular all across the country. Sandwiched between the curt temperatures and the forecast are Willard's amusing anecdotes that are enjoyed at the breakfast table by viewers. On the air, Willard wears a toupee, but says he is more comfortable without it, and was not wearing one during our interview.
I'm just wearing the hat to hide the sins here. Look at that beautiful... So normally you see me with hair, but you guys were cheap. You didn't come up with $50, so you get me without the hair.
Willard owns a farm in Virginia and commutes there on the weekends. He lives in New York during the week and rises early to go to work.
I get up at, all of us get up at the same time. We all sleep in the same bed, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And we get up with Grumpy and Smiley. Get up around 4:15, Monday through Friday. And they take us to work. They bring us to work. So we'll get there about 5 minutes of 5. And then I have two writers. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm a performer or whatever. I just sort of fell into weather 25 years ago. But we have two meteorologists that work for the Today Show, and they put the actual weather together. We have a little miniature weather station in the RCA building. So I come in at 5 o'clock. They've gotten there at 2 or 3:30, 3 o'clock. They brief me on it. Then
Willard is in Tuskegee for the purpose of taping a special segment on pet care. Today he interviewed Dr. Walter Bowie, Dean of Veterinary Medicine at Tuskegee Institute.
We are going to do a story about how people can care for their pets in the summertime, traveling with pets, little tips and tidbits of knowledge that makes the trip better for them, people that move across country when they have to take their family pet with them, dogs and cats, the more domesticated family pets. So that's it, that sort of thing.
The project in which Willard is involved is a pilot, which will air on the Today Show this spring. From Tuskegee, Dan Black, WSFA TV News. The bodies of the two adults and two of their foster children were pulled from the rubble early this morning. Fire officials say 4 other children were saved by quick-thinking neighbors. The victims are identified as 50-year-old Mary Lucky and her 55-year-old husband Ralph. The dead children, ages 10 and 14, were not identified because of a policy regarding wards of the state. Alma Stovall helped rescue the surviving children.
Me and my mother, we started busting the windows out the front of the house, you know. And one of the children, they was burned, but they was hanging out the window. So me and my mother, we pulled her on out the window.
Miss Stovall herself was burned while helping the children to escape the flames. State fire marshals and county officers suspect foul play as the cause of the fire, but are not giving any further information concerning their investigation. They also refuse to comment on the exact cause of the victims' deaths. The 4 children who survived the fire were taken to Jackson's hospital and are listed in satisfactory condition. From the Wa community, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The emotions of the abortion issue were heard for most of the day. The issue is 2 bills proposed by Representative Euclid Raines. One would require parental consent for an unwed mother 18 years or younger to have an abortion, and the other would prohibit public funds for ads or counseling services that encourage abortions. But one point that didn't get much attention could be the factor that most affects the future of at least one of the bills. That factor was revealed by the Legislative Fiscal Office. They say the bill prohibiting public money for ads and counseling could jeopardize the state's participation in the federal Medicaid program. The Health Committee listened all day to a long list of anti- and pro-abortion advocates, but they postponed any final vote until later. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Palmer said he received word this afternoon of the approval of the plan submitted to the Justice Department in early August. During that time, Councilman Joe Reed stayed up front in the fight against the plan, saying it diluted black voting strength in his district, number 3. Most of Reed's attacks at that time were aimed at the mayor and Councilman Luther Oliver. Oliver's revision of a plan by the mayor was the one the council eventually adopted, and it was that plan the Justice Department approved today. After tonight's meeting, Reed said he is not surprised the Reagan administration Justice Department approved the plan. He said politics worked. The Republican president came to the rescue of a Republican mayor. He said the Reagan administration has shown very little concern for civil rights, so he expected the plan to be approved. Councilman Donald Watkins, who was also involved in protesting the plan last summer, said he has little or no confidence in the Reagan administration to look after civil rights, and this decision by the Justice Department just confirms his suspicions. Though the new plan is now official, it has been challenged in federal court. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Flashes, and it was very timely. You know what the headline was? I'm real pleased that one of my former economics students was and got some releases in the, as you know, the deficit that was announced, some $93 billion in the '83 budget, is of concern, and that of course is because the increased government demands for money. Terms. Now, I did teach at the university for a while, and I'm
well pleased that one of my former economics students.
Alabama is no longer an agricultural state. We are an industrial state. You would think about Michigan being industrialized. Well, so is Alabama. So we have the third highest unemployment rate as we come out of the recession. This is good news for Alabama because our industry will pick up. I omitted the discount rate. There are several tools that I did omit, but the discount rate. So that's great news. Up yesterday, stocks up today. What should have been done in that line. When I was appointed to the Federal Reserve Board, effective January the 1st,
it was Representative Bob Gafford of Birmingham who sponsored the bill that would have stopped the constitutional amendment from getting to the voters this fall. But Gafford says he's not against the isolation concept, just this version of isolation. In fact, Gafford served notice on the House members that he will offer a change in House and Senate rules that would provide for isolation. Gafford, and some others, said any isolation provision belongs in the rules, not the Constitution of the state. Representative George Clark, who sponsored the isolation bills for Governor James last year, rallied a majority of the members into defeating Gafford's repealer. But Clark is reportedly drafting another isolation provision that he presumably hopes will iron out any problems other members have with the current constitutional amendment proposal. Later, the House was faced with Speaker Joe McCorkadale's constitutional amendment that would automatically call the legislature back into session without pay if either budget is declared in proration or running short of money. Once back in session, the legislature would be required to solve the problem of proration. Although the vote for McCorkadale's idea was 52 to 37, the Speaker fell 10 votes short of the necessary amount needed to pass a proposed constitutional amendment. Late this afternoon, a dozen White House advance agents dropped into the Speaker's office to go over some tentative information gathering for the President's scheduled March 15th visit to a joint session of the legislature. More concrete arrangements on the visit are expected to be settled next week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
More than 245,000 Alabamians were out of work last month, and that's according to Franklin James, Director of the State Department of Industrial Relations. He says a key factor in the unemployment level rising to its highest point since record-keeping began is the winter storm that hit last month. James says many workers were laid off during that time. He also says unemployment usually rises in January due to slumps in retail sales after the Christmas season and seasonal downturns in construction trades. But he says the bad weather just made it worse. James says the unemployment figures may be a little high since they're based on the week of January 10th through the 16th when the worst of the winter occurred. James says unemployment claims have dropped off in February, and that's a sign the jobless rate might ease off. Alabama's unemployment rate hit 11% in December, and it was 10.5% in January of 1981. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
There are 16 schools in the Montgomery County school system that have been identified as having ceilings made with asbestos. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, any exposure to this cancer-causing agent involves some health risk. There are several ways to remove asbestos, but right now it's not known how much it will cost. That's why the school board has agreed to work with the State Building Commission to select a consultant to give them advice on the problem. The board appointed Mac Johnson, Dr. John Winston, and Nellie Will to a committee to study the matter. School Superintendent Henry Adair says he hopes to use some of the county's share of oil lease windfall money to make the repairs if Alabama voters approve Amendments 1, 2, and 3 on March 2nd. School officials hope to start work on the asbestos problem after June 1st when the schools are out. Adair says he hopes everything is finished by the 1982-83 school year. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The first of the two controlling measures considered by the House was Governor James' proposed constitutional amendment for budget isolation, which faces voter ratification later this fall. The House was being asked by Representative Bob Gafford to repeal that proposed addition to the Constitution and in its place adopt a resolution changing the House and Senate rules to isolate the budgets. The House rejected Gafford's idea to repeal the constitutional amendment and won't be faced with a vote on the isolation resolution until next week. The second controlling measure was sponsored by House Speaker Joe McCorkadale. It would propose a constitutional amendment to require the legislature to automatically return into session if the state's budgets start running short of money. Although the Speaker's idea won a majority of the House votes, it fell 10 votes short of that needed to adopt the constitutional amendment. The apparent motivating factor for the 37 opposing votes to the Speaker's bill was the provision that required the members to come back and serve in a special session without pay. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.